Okay, does that work better? Yes, better? Okay, yeah. I'll use that.
We got you, we've got you. I'm just letting everyone filter in. Give it a couple of minutes.
Okay, maybe that's better. Okay.
Okay.
Great. Hi, thanks.
All right, I think I've got everybody. Okay, let's see if we give this 2 more minutes because we've got a few more. I can see attendees filtering in a little bit now. Okay. Right. Okay. Good evening, everybody. My name is Rachel Weiss. I'm the commissioning editor at Flint Books, which is an exciting new non-fiction imprint from the History Press, which is the UK's largest independent history publisher. And we dedicate ourselves at Flint Books to creating books that spark, whether that's sparking debate, sparking, in this case, conversation, sparking joy, so we really want to kind of create books that make a change and have a meaningful impact in people's lives. And that was very much at the heart of what we're talking about today. So M-Boldened, which I hope some of you have had a chance to read. If you haven't yet, use your wonderful discount that will have come through on your Eventbrite registration and head over to A Great Read, which is a fantastic indie online retailer, book retailer, who are running a brilliant offer anyway on the book. And because you're here tonight, you get an extra £1 off. So do use that. And take a moment, to look at the book. I'm incredibly proud to have been involved in this project, but I am a very small part of this project. This project really is all about the amazing contributors, so I'm very glad that we've got you here tonight, and about Caroline Harris, who edited this book and brought it together, and Caroline's waving right now. And we very much worked on this book from a place of wanting to break down global taboos that exist around the menopause, and also to open up the conversation in a way that actually just hasn't happened before. We felt that a lot of the menopause dialogues that were out there tended to be quite single perspective. They were really powerful and meaningful. We see ourselves very much as a contribution to that. But we wanted to do something different. We wanted to be able to bring in voices that just hadn't been included in the conversation right now. So when you get a chance to explore the book, you will find voices from Afghanistan, from Pakistan. We have global health leaders from both the States, the UK, Nigeria, Europe. We also have an incredible chapter on exposing some quite powerful sort of issues that exist in the UK criminal justice system around women's sexual health and particular menopause health. So if you have an opportunity, please do delve into the book. It's very much a book you can dip in and out of. And we are going to be hosting a series of panels throughout this week and into next week. So do take a look at the Eventbrite and the Flint Twitter feed so that if you hopefully enjoyed tonight, you can explore a little bit more. So it's my absolute pleasure. As I said, this book is all about the contributors. So I'm so delighted to have some of them with us tonight. And I'd love to introduce you to Diane Danzebrink, who might just wave so that we all know it's Diane. Diane is a psychotherapist, a well-being consultant, and a menopause expert. She has done incredible work in the founding of the not-for-profit organisation Menopause Support, which has offered incredible amounts of menopause education, information, advice and support to so many people. And in 2018, Diane founded the national Make Menopause Matter campaign, which has, not only created a voice in Parliament for menopause conversations, but also has championed menopause education in the secondary school system. So, it's so exciting to be able to have Diane's views tonight on menopause in the workplace. I also have with us Sophia Tzeng, who comes from the States tonight. So thank you so much for kind of, jumping the time divide to be with us. Sophia is an incredible entrepreneur. She is a facilitator and executive strategist for Ascita, a consultancy that helps not-for-profit and social impact leaders and teams find a way to kind of create transformative and inclusive strategic design. She's a former corporate attorney, an entrepreneur, a non-profit executive, a professor of business management and collaborative design, and Sophia has also served on a number of non-profit boards, including Period, the menstrual movement in the States. So I can't think of someone better to come and talk about workplace menopause as well. And lastly, but by no means least, we have the incredible Rachel Weiss with us, who is the founder of the Menopause Cafe movement, which has impacted so many lives by doing exactly what sits at the heart of this book, opening up real conversations about the menopause, where people are, in a way that is relatable and comfortable and safe for them. And, that I think is something that, really is profound and life-changing for people. So thank you all so much for being with us tonight. I wanted to sort of start off, because I think a lot of people kind of think, well, why be talking about menopause in the workplace? So why do you think it is so important for menopause to be supported in the workplace? And I wondered if, Diane, you might kind of start us off from your perspective and the campaigning work you've done.
Yeah, sure. So it's vital, essentially. We have more women over 50 in the workplace in the UK than we've ever before. So currently 4.4 million. Women over 50 is the fastest growing demographic in the workplace. And yet approximately 1 in 4 during their perimenopause and menopause will consider leaving the workplace. And studies have shown us that approximately 1 in 10 actually do. So we're essentially talking about a loss of jobs and careers for individual women, but we're also talking about a drain of talent for businesses and organisations. So simply, supporting menopausal women in the workplace is a win-win situation. It's a win-win for everybody. It's almost ridiculous to think that we don't, but I think it's evolutionary. So, we have policy for maternity in the workplace. We don't yet have policy for menopause. I suspect in time that will come. But what I would much rather see than policy is a culture that supported menopause in the workplace. It's absolutely vital that there is an understanding, because I think part of the problem is that none of us learn anything about menopause. So hence, the campaign to have it included in the curriculum. And if we don't learn anything about it, whether we are an employee or if we're a line manager, if women don't understand what's happening to them as individuals and their organisation don't have any understanding of menopause, then there's a very, very big knowledge gap to fill. And consequently, what often happens is that women actually end up walking away from jobs and careers that they love and they've cultivated over many years, and we end up losing really valuable people. I mean, just to give you one example, the amount of women working for the NHS. So women in the NHS are 77% of the workforce. The average age of those women is 43 years old. We expect most women to be perimenopausal by the time they're 45, and many women start their symptoms at 42 and 43. And Jo, honestly, I can't tell you the amount of nurses that I've counselled over the last couple of years who have either left the profession or they're on the verge of leaving the profession. And if there's one set of people that we can't afford to lose, it's our healthcare professionals.
Yeah, I mean, that's just shocking, and actually such a powerful example, because, we've all had those moments where, we feel that actually we can't continue with our roles because of what's happening in our personal life, whether that's our physical or our mental well-being. And yet sometimes it's actually not massive shifts that can make a huge difference. And as you said, just retaining a talent pool is so important. Sophia, I'm really interested to know what that kind of looks like in the US. For you, why do you feel, in American companies, that it's such an important thing?
Mm-hmm. Thanks for asking, and this may be an American perspective as well. I really appreciate the business case that Diane, you laid out in terms of lost revenues, the need for culture, especially in healthcare. In America, I think we're all super fired up around human rights, civil rights, the recent 2020 social justice movement bringing up a call for overturning systemic oppression. Here in Portland, even the Abraham Lincoln statues were felled last night, this week. And so to me, I would place menopause in that context and say that to me, menopause is sort of the crux of where systemic oppressions hit, because it's where sexism hits and ageism hits, overlain by a woman's biological experience, the physical, mental, emotional shifts of a really significant period of a transition. And so I think, again, this may be taking it a little bit too broad, but the conversations are happening again of seeing that women bear the greater burdens in the workplace, reflecting the greater burdens in society, from home to family relationships, social expectations, expense, work itself, the daily internalization of microaggressions, competitiveness, structural harm. And in ageism, women experience a devaluation and loss of credibility, not just even holding the job, but even within the job. I think men's compensation as CEOs peak in their 50s, right? Women's declines precipitously, and then they're edged out. Even here, there are HR and compliance structures really protect women's rights and staying in the workplace, but I can't tell you how many organizations I've worked with as a facilitator, from some of the biggest public corporations to local nonprofits to local and larger level government. It's very easy to excuse the letting go or making a workplace really uncomfortable for a woman over 50. It's completely legal, even though we have all these structural supports. And especially if you add on to that racism. So in America, like a woman of color may experience that to the nth degree, even more than white women. So I guess I didn't mean to, this is the conversation in America right now. It's a little big, it's a little bit heavy, it's a little in your face. But yeah, it's all the isms, the structural oppressions that I think are encapsulated in a mature woman's experience who's going through menopause and other biological struggles.
But you see, I think that's so important. I think that, you're right. That's what is so almost difficult about having the menopause conversation, and why it becomes such a taboo, is this sense that actually it does intersect with a lot of, as you say, structural and systemic perspectives about women and women as they age, and women's place in the world, and people's place in the world. It's a very complex issue, and therefore it becomes almost not easy, but I think that it can feel for some companies that, oh, well, this is too complicated and too thorny and too sensitive, so maybe we can't touch that. even when they know that there are clear things that need to be addressed. Rachel, I wondered if, you've obviously done a lot of work also within kind of the workplace and outside of the workplace. For you, what do you think is sort of so important about having support in the workplace?
I think we need support in the workplace in order to speak up. It's the same for any, I was going to say minority, but the ironic thing is that menopausal women aren't a minority because it happens to more women than pregnancy happens. But we need support to speak up because there is still a stigma around being menopausal, which I think ties in with Sophia's point about the intersectionality of ageism, gendered ageism. So it's not like going to tell your boss, I've broken my leg, I need some adjustments at work. If it was that simple, maybe we wouldn't need support. But because it often also intersects with mental health, it's getting better, but there's still stigma around that. There's stigma, unfortunately, at least in Western societies, about being an older woman. So I was quite shocked at how ashamed a lot of women are of being menopausal, and they don't want to tell work that they're menopausal or perimenopausal. So I think they need support. I think we're just a few decades after what it used to be like to be pregnant in the workplace. I don't remember those days, but I've heard that if you were pregnant at work, that was it, you'd get sacked, whether directly or indirectly. And it was an embarrassing thing to talk about because it meant you'd had sex. And I wonder if menopause is in a similar position now, and in a few decades, the next generation will look back and just be gobsmacked that we didn't just say, I'm menopausal, ask for the adjustments we need, and continue to thrive at work.
I think you're right. I mean, I think that, we see cultural shifts, but I think also because I think sometimes the shifts can feel quite small, but because we haven't had them, we celebrate them so much that actually we don't necessarily go, well, hang on, they're not big enough, actually. But yeah, we've seen shifts in, responses to mental health and to pregnancy, that, there are still so many. I mean, alongside menopause, there's, taboos around, being able to talk about miscarriage, generally your reproductive health, I think is a really difficult, often quite toxic conversation to be able to have in the workplace and with an employer. So I think, yeah, you're right that, one would hope in generations to come, they will look back and kind of say, well, why? This was nonsensical in so many ways. Yeah. But I think that, there is potentially that sort of, that kind of trap that we fall into, that we kind of, we get sort of so ecstatic that we've made some milestone, we stop
stop being angry and campaigning.
Yeah.
It's a balance. I think, like, it's been a balance for feminism. It's how much do you get angry? How much do you celebrate? How do you do, I can't remember the quote of Ruth Ginsburg. How do you persuade people by being different but getting them on board with you?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's true of any cultural shift, I think.
I think there's room for all of us. There's room for the angrier ones, and there's room for the more celebratory ones. We're all on the same side. Rather than arguing over should we be one or the other, let's just embrace our diversity and all campaign for the same thing in whatever way suits our personalities.
Yeah, I think that's really sensible. I mean, I wanted to ask all of you, and you don't need to share your own personal stories, but I think, Diane, it really brought home when you shared a specific kind of, you talk particularly about nurses, because I think, we all relate to, an actual sort of story. It kind of touches us in a way that abstract concepts just don't. So whether or not you'd be prepared to share your own experiences or experiences of colleagues, etc., people that you might have met along the way, about what are some of the things, again, we can talk about this in an abstract way, menopause isn't supported enough in the workplace, but what does that actually look like? What are the things that people are saying, well, actually, I had this experience and it made it really difficult for me to do my job? Rachel, do you want to start us off, actually? And then
I'd love to, because two people are springing to mind. One is a train driver who I met at one of the union conferences. And her difficulty was, if you're driving the train and you suddenly flood, so you have a really heavy period, which is a perimenopausal symptom, how can you go and change your clothes?
Yeah.
And the other one,
literally, practically, yeah.
So just a very simple thing, depends what kind of jobs women, and those are exactly the jobs I feel we need more women in those jobs. We don't want them to be squeezed out because we're underrepresented in train driving or other things. School teaching, which is female dominated, you cannot walk out of your class and leave those kids unattended when you suddenly, either due to hot flush or flooding, need a change of clothes. So I've talked to a headmistress in our local primary school who has told all her staff she's on standby. If they need to leave the classroom, just ring her and she'll go herself or get someone else to be there with no questions asked. And that's quite a simple thing to put in place, and it stops the embarrassment and it educates the younger ones. And the third one is Chief Inspector Helen Smith of Greater Manchester Police, who has written and blogged about the impact on her as a senior police officer of the cognitive and psychological symptoms of menopause and how that made her doubt herself in her prime. She's going to come and talk at our Menopause at Work seminar in Flushfest 21, and I'm really looking forward to hearing her story.
Yeah.
So those are my, off the top of my head, examples.
And they're such powerful ones because, I mean, again, something like the train driver isn't something that you think about, and then suddenly you realise that the difficulties and practicalities of something that actually is just really hard to, manage. Actually, at the best of times, in your own home, if you have flooding or something like that, it's not easy. But then to experience that in a very public space is, amplifies everything that surrounds that. And simple practical things like that head teacher's response can make such a huge difference. Yeah. Sophia, what about you? Are there stories that, the people that you have worked with, that have shared with you about, their experiences, whether it's sort of, stereotypes or bias or practical experiences?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you. Well, personally, I'm in perimenopause now, but in my early 40s, I experienced a thyroid disorder, coupled with some really deep family tragedies that absolutely mimicked the symptoms of menopause, as I understand it. So it's kind of like an early menopause, except you still have to have your period, and it's 10 times worse. And so at that time, personally, I mean, I just remember being at board meetings and that blood down your leg and there's a puddle, physically, mentally, emotionally incapacitated, unable to get off the couch. I was unable to work for some time, which caused some family issues. I'm a single parent. And so personally, I think some of the biological impacts for me, it was thyroid as well as some genetic issues around menstruation really brought about some really difficult personal challenging issues, which actually sort of gave birth to the period movement, because we experienced some housing instability, and my daughter, there's a whole public story around the birth of period. And then going back to work and living in Portland, where I was often the only person of color, and one of the few females in business contexts. And as an Asian, I look a lot younger than I am. With the sexism, ageism, racism, I actually found myself in challenged work environments. So I had to create my own company. Like, I had to create a way of working where I could facilitate and go work for a day or two and then lie on the couch the rest of the time and take care of myself. And I think that for me, the fortunate thing is, as the kids have grown up and I've medically managed and professionally as a strategic designer, I work a lot with teams at the executive and board level across many organizations supporting strategic planning and exec development. So I work with a lot of different women. I've also helped to design and direct the Women's Executive Forum here in Oregon, where we bring CEOs from across America who are women together for a weekend of support, sharing, sort of mutual inspiration. And in those situations, I've been able to meet many different women at many levels. And if I could stereotype, or maybe categorize the two extremes of women that I've encountered that I think are struggling. I mean, on one hand, it's terrible. It's that stereotype of the bitter, brittle person, who may cause a lot of sabotage. And I'm brought into organizations, boards that are really struggling sometimes with women in position who because and no fault, I think, of their own, of living in a system where they're constantly challenged and having to develop certain ways of working in workplaces that hadn't changed yet. So on one side, I've seen women really really draw into themselves. And on the other side, and I'd say this is mostly where I live, women with incredible grace and wisdom and ferocious calm. Like they've seen it, they've lived through it, they've made change in major corporations, organizations, associations across America, and I think that's sort of been a model for me. But also I've seen a lot of what we do in the forum and in our conversations is create kind of affinity groups, you know, places where you can come together and talk about these things and strategize in these safe, brave spaces. And I wanted to say, I know those are stereotypes, but also with all the ageism going on, you know, it's sort of what's happening in the world now. There's this, you know, the authoritarian male world, which we see now happening in the US right now, right? Like the incompetency can rule. Just, sorry. And then on the other side, we have this incredible place of where human lived experiences are really being listened to, of the most oppressed and the most vulnerable, including and especially older women. So, you know, in California a couple of years ago, there was a Women on Boards bill that was signed into law that requires gender equitable representation on California corporate boards. And those are not young women, right? These, you don't take people onto your boards that haven't had experience. So even though I describe these things, I feel like we're living in a bifurcated reality right now of different movements in the business world, where those that are really embracing lived experience equity across the board, from gendered to racial, and then the other side, and I'm working with organizations like this too, where it's, you know, all the board and the CEO look one way. You know, they're a certain kind of person in a certain kind of form, and there's a certain toxicity that flows through. So anyway, from personal to, I think, professional, I'm definitely seeing the mix. And I think those of us are sort of trying to invent a new reality here, both for ourselves and for our organizations and systems.
And I think that's really interesting. And I mean, one thing that actually kind of took me back for a minute when you were talking about your struggles was almost that actually the only way out of that within the workplace at that time for you was to invent your own company. And it's like, that's quite an extreme, but actually it's true that I've seen so many, you know, women at different points hit various issues, kind of biologically or with their mental health or with the balance of their lives, and actually often feel that the only way forward for them is to step completely out of the traditional workplace, however successful they've been within that, and create something that sits apart from that because they cannot see a way for that system to support them. And I think that speaks quite profoundly to the fact that there's something wrong then in that system. Diane, I wonder, you know, as I said, you kind of started this with the amazing example of the nurse, but I wondered if you might be able to share a few other of the ones that have really moved you about women's, you know, lived experience in the workplace with menopause.
Yeah, I mean, you know, there are, honestly, Jo, there are so many, but I think particularly those who have the responsibility for others as part of their work. So as I said, I mentioned nurses, but, you know, anybody that gives any kind of health and care support, teachers, certainly, police officers, certainly. So, and a lot of this is around their cognitive and psychological ability. So if they're having cognitive and psychological symptoms, and I think particularly with menopause, there is still this idea that menopause is hot flushes and period stopping. And it's just so much more complex than that. And for many women, their perimenopausal symptoms will be things like anxiety, low mood, irritability, issues around their confidence, their concentration, their memory, etc., etc. And I think if you're somebody who your job entails perhaps giving medication or care to somebody, or looking after a class of 30, or looking after the public, when you don't have, your cognitive ability isn't as sharp as you would like it to be, or you're starting to doubt yourself, then those are the things that make women, you know, sort of they make them more anxious, and if there is no support, that does make them step away. But equally, I think if you're customer facing, so I think particularly of a lady that I worked with who worked for a large supermarket chain, and she would her job was sitting at a till, you know, sort of scanning products through and working with customers. And she had a terrible time because she was having recurrent hot flushes, which were very, very uncomfortable for her. She was sitting in a sticky polyester uniform, and she was also experiencing really heavy periods. She was really struggling to have as many breaks as she would like. Obviously, in a busy supermarket environment, it's very difficult to be able to get the attention of your supervisor. You know, if you've got a bank of 30 tills, that's very, very difficult. I mean, amazingly, this particular woman went on to raise awareness within her own organisation, and actually raised awareness at head office level and got the organisation to look at menopause as an issue that needed to be supported in the workplace. But, you know, I think the other thing that I don't think we've considered at all yet is those people who are self-employed. So, you know, we have a huge amount of self-employed people in the UK. Many of them are sole traders. It's just them. And I know for me, my own experience meant that I basically couldn't do anything. I was running 2 small businesses at the time when my surgical menopause happened. Nobody gave me any advice or information about the possible, you know, sort of about the possible symptoms of surgical menopause. And if it wasn't for the fact that, you know, sort of I'm in a relationship that's very supportive, I don't know where I'd be. So I think we also have to consider not just those that work for big organizations, but also those that work pretty much in isolation too.
Yeah. And as one of those very people who has spent most of their life, well, the most recent years working as a sole trader, I completely understand. And especially when you're going through moments of very difficult transition of whatever that may be, you know, big changes in your life and mental health and impacts, the added stress that comes with how am I then going to be able to sustain my living?
Absolutely.
That. Yeah. And, you know, I mean, you talk really movingly about your experience in your chapter in the book. I found it did actually move me to tears the first time I read it. And I think, you know, it's interesting how you've all touched on kind of some of the practical issues that don't get talked about. And I think, you know, the like flooding, you know, so we all talk about hot flushes, but it actually wasn't something that I was particularly aware of until I read the book about what a big, you know, how that can be a quite common symptom in perimenopause leading up to menopause. And yeah, it's something I had a very unfortunate pregnancy where I ended up having a lot of flooding, and the experience of that was profoundly traumatic, because being at a dinner party and then suddenly like there's a pool of blood on the floor is very, very difficult. And I think, you know, not how do we create these cultures, you know, we talked about culture shift, where we can open up these kind of conversations about things that are very intimate and very personal, but at the same time are a reality that is being lived. And if you practically need to go and change your sanitary towel a lot more times on your till checkout, that's a really, really important thing, because that otherwise you're not going to want to stand up from that till checkout seat with anybody being able to see what may be underneath there. And so, I mean, in your experiences of working at different levels in organizations, how do we create that kind of cultural shift where these things stop being things that we're all really frightened to talk about and become things that, you know, actually feel okay to go to your employer and say, this is what is happening to me, this is why I need to take more regular breaks? What kind of advice would you give on that? Rachel, should we start with you on that?
Yeah, because I'm an employer, so maybe I'll take that angle.
Yeah.
It sounds like the other two, well, maybe you are as well. So that was my first encounter with menopause, was as an employer myself, when one of my employees suddenly got worse migraines. Now at that point, I had no idea that migraine could be menopausal linked, and neither did she. So I think the two things we need are knowledge. Just basic knowledge of the range of possible symptoms would be a good start. Like you said, Joe, not realizing about flooding, of cognitive impairment, emotions, migraines. So knowledge and compassion in the workplace, which I would like to extend beyond the menopause. In my idea, we wouldn't have to have a menopause policy of pregnancy. We would just have a people policy, which is listen to your people. And it wasn't easy for me to accommodate a worker who got migraines from looking at the screen when we're all working on screens all day. So I don't think there's an easy solution. And it's not as easy as, oh, reassign her somewhere else because we are a small business. And, you know, there are a lot of economic things. So I don't think there's an easy answer, but the start is knowledge and compassion and engage in the conversation and be creative.
Yeah.
You know, I think once we get rid of the fear, then our creative brain engages and we're resourceful, we'll come up with solutions.
Yeah.
So knowledge and compassion, yeah.
I love particularly what you were saying about compassion there, and I think that absolutely, you know, one of the other contributors in the book, Jennifer Nadel, is the founder of Compassion in Politics, and she speaks very much about this sense that actually, as a society, we need to actually have more compassion, to meet people where they are and then listen to them and then work out, as you say, our creative problem solving skills can then come into play. So Sophia, what about you? You know, what do you think are, you know, you've talked so passionately and so rightly about some of the very difficult cultural things that are going on in the States right now. What do you think are the kind of cultural shifts that need to be made, you know, particularly in the workplace, that could enable these much more open conversations?
Yeah, thank you for asking. I think it's perfect timing to ask the question, and also call out, I didn't take a professional approach at all to writing my chapter. It was completely personal stories, when the truth, my work is all about strategy and culture change in organizations and systems, actually. And so I think I love talking about knowledge and compassion and the personal things we have to bring. But in America, we're finding that even the people who speak most about compassion and knowledge have deep implicit bias here. So one of the things that is happening is the need to redesign structures to support culture change. Before COVID, in the business world, you know, there's this term in the statement in the business world that is like, culture eats strategy for breakfast, lunch, and dinner, right? So as much as you can cognitively decide something, it's what we're raised with that changes us. And there was a lot of work on how do you build culture shift in organizations and across systems because of Gen Z. You know, you talk about intimacy, personality. I mean, even my girls, they post everything. like there's no barrier, right? So there was already this massive need to redesign workplaces using design tools like experience mapping, you know, like addressing challenges, bringing up things, making the workplace work for, you know, 20-somethings who want maternity leave for getting a puppy. You know, like there's just, you know, there was already this move, and now with the social justice movement, like 99% of my work now is really designing equity alongside strategy. And I would say there are some really great learnings there for also addressing what menopausal women and trans may be experiencing. And that is really, how do you redesign culture to address the lived experiences of the other? You know, right now it's around non-white BIPOC Black, Indigenous people and people of color. But there's really not much in terms of like, how do we redesign the workplace for women, especially women in transition, namely, as Rachel was talking about, the predominant number of older women in the workplace experiencing menopause. And I'd say there's a challenge to that when I bring that up, right? In the US, the racial issues are so upfront. And I personally think, and shared with you all, I think everyone's got mother issues. And so I think there's resistance to it. It's really interesting. But I would say, in my role as an employer in my consultancy, but also one of my roles right now as an interim CEO of a nonprofit funded with nearly $80 million in special funding. We're massively hiring. And we're trying to place equity at the center. And I would say we're putting into place some structural commitments, borrowing from what has come up recently in terms of how BIPOC folks and communities have recommended that companies do. And one of them is having at least 50% BIPOC, but also 50% women on your teams and staff across an age range, creating cultures of listening, learning, and asking. So really deep training of dominant voices to listen and learn, which is a lot harder. I'm sure you've all experienced this, to just listen, just be quiet, to stop speaking, greater investment in the development of people and their own self-awareness, of our own marginalization, how we put vulnerabilities on ourselves. And the most controversial thing of all, which I think is really interesting, is in communities here, we're talking about how do you center BIPOC people in decision-making? Well, what happens if you center women, and especially women in menopause, a decision-making around policies and the experience of what they're going through? So I think centering those who are most marginalized, those whose experiences haven't been heard, is one of the really key things. And it's not going to be easy, right? Like, I've got a whole system to work with that particular project, but I think those are policies that we're actually right now trying to institutionalize.
And I think, that's an amazing, to be able to develop those strategic systems and put that in place. Hopefully what you're doing is role modeling for a lot of other companies what could be a way forward, to make real change. But sometimes it has to come from one person first, being brave enough to actually say, well, we're not going to just talk about this, we're going to do it. And that makes a massive difference. Diane, what about you? If there was something within kind of creating cultural shifts in your experience, obviously you've done a lot on the kind of campaigning side. What would it be that, you think could actually make a real difference?
The key to all of this, Jo, is education. That's where the key to this lies. Because if women and if the general public, if women and men in the general public don't understand what menopause is, they can't recognize it in themselves, their partners, their colleagues, their family, their friends. If we don't have education within the workplace so that organizations recognize what menopause is, understand why it's important for them to support it as they would with anything else that goes on in somebody's life, then that's key. But we also have to think about what are the practical things that can be done. Because, the key is education. Without education, nothing will change. So we need to educate both. For me, I think we should have a public health education for everybody. And then all organizations need to have menopause awareness education. And we need line manager training for all line managers within organizations. So then you've got a basic level of understanding, and hopefully that will instill more compassion, but a basic level of understanding. And if you have that basic level of understanding, then if we have a culture where menopause is going to be supported and people know it's going to be supported within their organization, then they need to know, okay, so what are the options for me as a woman who is going through this? What options do I have? So we need some practical things. We need things like there has to be some kind of signposting within the organization, because people shouldn't have to You know, they shouldn't have to fight through the forest to be able to find the pathway to somebody that can help them. So we need to have some signposting. You know, some organizations have had part of their intranet specifically for menopause. Some organizations have developed menopause support, literally sort of lunchtime groups and things. Some organizations have WhatsApp groups. Some have, so at Menopause Support, we have a poster that you can print off from the Menopause Support website. That can go up in both the men's and the ladies' loos. That can go up in staff rooms, you know, in any sort of communal area, so that everybody recognises the symptoms. But then people need to understand, so what can you do for me if I am flooding, if I am sitting in an office chair all day and I have dreadful vaginal atrophy, and the pain of me sitting here for 8 hours is making me question whether or not I can continue to do my job. If my brain fog is so terrible, what are the practical solutions that you can offer me? So we're very much there looking towards reasonable adjustments, and all organisations should be offering reasonable adjustments. But what I often say to women is, remember that your experience is completely unique to you. So if you're going to your line manager for the very first time to talk about this, bear in mind that you might be the first woman to ever go to your line manager to say, I'm experiencing perimenopause. So as well as having, you know, sort of, as well as being able to tell them what's going on with you, have some solutions for them. Tell them what might work for you, and then expect them to say, do you know what, I need to go away and think about this, or maybe talk to colleagues. But hopefully the answer will be, we can certainly help you, but if you can come up with some ideas of your own. So if it's the fact that, you know, going back to the flooding, and you're in a big office environment where you don't like the fact that you're having to walk past many of your colleagues lots of times a day, to run backwards and forwards to the loo, a really simple adjustment could be, okay, so for maybe temporarily, we'll relocate your workstation. And also, maybe, I mean, I've done this with a client of mine. We arranged with her employer that they would put some lockers in the loos so that she could keep spare sanitary wear and a change of clothes. And that kept her in the workplace. So yes, it's about knowledge. Hopefully, compassion follows when we have knowledge, but it's also about having practical solutions to what can we do, but also as individuals, what can we offer as solutions for ourselves. And then it's about very much having this as, it's about normalizing it essentially, whether it's in the workplace or whether it's in society. It's about talking about it as we would anything else.
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree. And I think, you know, it's interesting, we've had some amazing things on the chat. And I think that, you know, it's interesting to see quite a lot of the same issues coming up in the chat. We've got, you know, Rachel Edgerton was talking on the chat about exactly what you were just saying about private spaces where you can collect yourself, places to store changes of clothes, you know, desks near opening windows, allowing for natural fabric uniforms or dress codes that allow for layering, altered start times and all of that. And these are all, as you said, reasonable and actually very simple adjustments that don't have to impact on the economic functioning of a business. But it's also really pertinent, you know, it's also coming through a lot on the chat and in the Q&A that quite a few people are sharing that they didn't know. They just simply didn't know what they were going through. They didn't know that they were in perimenopause or in menopause. You know, I think that's you know, really interesting that, you know, we're still at this point where there is, as you said, such a lack of our own awareness, you know, about ourselves and our bodies, you know, and that, you know, I think you're right, sits fundamentally underneath all of this. If we don't change that, how do we make a fundamental change? We do have an interesting question, which we hasn't actually, it's a topic area we've not covered in our chat today. And it says, how could tech help? It seems that tech is everywhere, serving many people and problems, but not enough women quite yet. What would you see as a dream tech product to address menopause? So I'm going to put this out to Sophia first, if that's okay, just because I wonder if in the States there's been a slightly different kind of, you know, response in terms of tech. Tech.
Sure. I guess I'm going to process aloud because I hadn't thought of the question. So thank you for whoever asked it. I would say one thing that I love seeing, and it was sort of predicted a few years ago, is the emergence of more and more products, services, and technology and systems surrounding the woman's lived experience. So it's emerged most, I think, with the younger set that sort of buys everything right off the bat, you know, and so whether it's period tracking devices or, you know, you can, for a $38 scale on Amazon here in the US, you can step and it tells you everything from your body composition to your, you know, everything. I have a feeling that once that the design even further into sort of menopause specific products, actually, it's a great idea if you guys want to trademark that right now. Like, I would think that would be a brilliant thing. And I think we're ripe for a massive disruption in that area. If I could gather all of you in a brainstorming session and do a design thing, post it on Murally or whatever, let's do it. I think we could come up with 20 different products. And I will say there's a huge bias, as we all know, in the tech industry towards younger men. And younger men and older women just don't think about, again, the mother issue. Can I just, you know, call it out? So I think, yeah, there's not actually, in my knowledge, there's tracking around the elderly, but even, and I say elderly, but even issues with designing safety technologies or hearing it. There is incremental innovations, but not the massive disruption we've seen in other areas, from funeral arrangements to, you know, how you get your groceries. So I would suspect that, anyway, this is a general answer, that I think there are a lot of things, from how you track your bodies to how we alert people to how we are, where where we're at, to how we navigate products and services. I think there's a whole blank canvas there that we could design around, that should be designed around.
Yeah. I agree. I mean, there is so much baby tech out there, so much parenting tech these days. It's incredible. And yet, you know, as we've touched on, not actually 50% of the population will choose to parent or will be able to parent at some point, and yet 50% of the population will go through menopause. So it's really interesting. Rachel Edgerton said that we should design fans that detect a hot flush, which I think is a great idea. Rachel, do you want to sort of, you know, touch on this? Like, have you had thoughts around sort of technology and whether or not that could provide any sort of solutions or help in this space? Oh,
classic Zoom, I'm muted. Anyway, for me, this is now my extended memory. So because one of my perimenopausal symptoms is I can't remember stuff. I used to just remember stuff without trying, dates, random numbers. I can't do that anymore. So being able to write things down, either on a piece of paper or on some techie app, really helps me. Because once it gets beyond 3 things, I know I'm not going to remember it. So anything that, whether it's voice activated, whatever, for memory would be good. Those of us who are privileged enough to have a warm, dry home with private space, I think working from home, which many of us have experienced in lockdown, really helps. There is a toilet straight through that door there. I can get there easily without having to walk, you know, in terms of flooding, changing clothes, whatever. So yeah, the memory apps for the cognitive symptoms and working from home will work for some people, not for everybody.
Yeah.
Would be my main ones. And then, I mean, this is an untapped market. Any entrepreneurs out there, a lot of women and their partners in their 50s, 60s have got disposable income. If they, you know, if they put their money into kids and the kids have gone. So it's not even like a kindness. There should be an innovator out there who might talk to his or her mum and realize all the women themselves would come up with solution.
Well, interestingly, we appear to have one. Melissa, who's actually just popped in the chat that she's a startup incubator and researching the topic to disrupt and serve women in peri and menopause. So hopefully we might have an opportunity to reach out to her, because I think, you know, that this is a really interesting area. I've got another question which I'm going to just quickly post to Sophia before we move on perhaps a little bit, but this is particularly for the US. So Sophia, in the US, is there a substantial case law or legislation supporting menopausal women in work if they have seriously disabling cognitive difficulties, or does it vary from one employer to another as in the UK?
I saw that question, so I was looking it up while you were talking. So I don't know if it said, my background is, I do have my law degree. I was a practicing attorney. I'm barred, but I haven't practiced in a while. But I will say, when you asked that question, I immediately thought of the American Disabilities Act, because we do have an act that covers certain things that are classified with the unfortunate term disabilities. And I would assume that there are a lot of things attendant to menopause that people may get disability relief from. But unfortunately, in my very brief search, the only thing I could find was how menopause was actually used against women, which sounds very US, by the way, like used against women as a reason for their incapacity to actually do the work. So to be open, I don't know. I haven't done a LexisNexis search. I don't know where the case law is, but all of the things that come up have to do with the equality law in the UK, which I'd sort of applaud you all for. I have my theories around it, which may be a little bit controversial. I'm not super comfortable, but you know, in America, the racial discussion, the racial injustice discussion has really come to the fore. I think gender discussions have really sort of taken a backseat to the racial discussions, and I think there's also a great tension between white female feminism in the U.S. And BIPOC feminism in the U.S., which is sort of tearing that rift. I would assume, and again, I make a lot of assumptions here, that in the UK, and I practiced briefly in Europe when I was a younger attorney. But in the UK, there's probably, I'm guessing, greater homogeneity, so greater support for the experience. And in the US, I think the civil rift and the issues that people are fighting about now may preclude, I think, thinking in that direction. But again, these are sort of controversial thinkings, and my ideas possibly for why that doesn't exist. But I would love to see a greater case law and focus on creating the legal structures for the cultural change to happen, if that makes sense. There's just, and I'll say, I mean, just corporatism in America, and even just seeing where our courts are shifting, there's just so much interest. You know, there's so much legislative and other power in the hands of major multinational corporations that aren't about designing for people's experience, right? And so even though I say these things, I think the battle is going to be very, very entrenched and difficult in the US in the years to come.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting, as you said, that, you know, that tension between where we need legal change, cultural change, and what has to come first and which empowers the other, I think is always a really difficult kind of dynamic. There's been a comment on the chat that I wanted to particularly direct to Diane, because it actually kind of takes us full circle to where we started. I was a menopause specialist nurse and lost my specialist job in the hospital due to being bullied. The culture in the NHS is terrible. As you say, we're mainly women. We're completely unsupported by our female managers on every level. We don't have changing areas for access to WCs. We have to wear extremely uncomfortable uniforms for access to breaks and able to use fans in clinical areas, etc. I've been fighting a losing battle for the last 2 years on this within the NHS. And if the NHS can't support us as a caring profession, how can this be changed on a national level? Dan, I wonder, you know, in your experience, what you feel, you know, is interesting, because I've done some work very in a separate space on kind of role modelling within in the NHS and the challenges that can exist there. What do you think, you know, how could we actually help within the NHS itself? Is there sort of a specific, and do you know of any specific campaigns, etc., that are running to look at this?
Well, first of all, that makes me want to weep, because we are so desperate for NHS menopause specialists, because the fact that that's an NHS menopause specialist nurse who's been driven out. We are so short of NHS menopause specialist clinics, and so many women are being driven to have to find the funds for private menopause care that should come via the NHS, that to lose a single menopause specialist is absolutely tragic. There are pockets within the NHS. So I've worked with several NHS trusts who have done some menopause awareness training for their staff and for their line managers, but this needs to be across the board. It needs to be an NHS initiative across the whole of the NHS. But unfortunately, as with many areas of life, these things are broken up into separate trusts, separate CCGs, and there is not one thinking for all of them. So consequently, you will find little pockets of good practice, but that good practice needs to be extended. I would also say that we need some of the, not just senior women, but senior men too, not just in the NHS, but as we're specifically talking about the NHS, to essentially set out the guidelines as far as their organisation is concerned. And I think the problem is that I'm sorry to say it, but what was just said about bullying within the NHS, I've heard that in lots of situations that do not relate to menopause. So if we're talking about cultural shifts, I have often said, where is the care in healthcare if healthcare professionals are being bullied out of their own profession? So we need a massive shift. But if we're talking specifically about menopause, we need awareness, we need training, but we also need for some of the key people within NHS trusts to essentially set out their vision for menopause within their trust. But ideally, we need this to be at a national level, because we need, we need similar thinking across the board. And the sad thing is that at the moment, it's a lose-lose situation, because it's a loose situation for patients and it's a loose situation for healthcare professionals. And what happens is it ends up costing the NHS, I suspect, billions of pounds a year in repeat appointments for women who are not getting the right advice, in onward referrals to cardiology, rheumatology, psychology, psychiatry, etc., etc. And then at the other end, losing amazing people like the lady that's commented because she can't get the right support. This is menopause education, information, and support is a win-win situation. And it will be tragic if we don't ensure that we are the generation to make menopause matter.
Thank you. I feel like that's a really quite kind of amazing note to actually leave this session on, that kind of, education, information and support, and that sense of wanting to make menopause matter. I want to just check if there's anything else that Rachel and Sophia would like to have touched on before we end the conversation tonight. If you do, please just, if there's anything you'd like to say in sort of summation of the things we've touched on. Rachel?
So much in my head, so I think just thank you for keeping the conversations going, and to Diane for the Make Menopause Matter campaign that has got it taught in schools in England, and I hope we'll do that in Scotland too. And get the health education people educated, because they don't know about it either.
Okay, thank you.
Let's just keep talking.
Yeah.
And Wales, yes, and so many good things in the chat as well. I want time to read it all.
And Sophia, is there anything you'd like to kind of end on?
Just thanks to you all for making this space for our shared experience, both personally and professionally. And also just to both Rachel and Diane, also for the incredible groundbreaking work you've done in setting an example for those of us in the US who are woefully behind on this topic, to really take heart and follow along with and work with. So thank you.
Yeah. Thank you so much. I mean, I'm incredibly grateful, not just to all of you for tonight, but it brings much comfort and joy to me that I don't think my daughter will grow up with the same lack of education, lack of awareness, lack of confidence around her reproductive and sexual health and her aging, that I think so many women of my generation and women before did. And I think a lot of that comes down to women like you. So thank you so much for putting yourselves out there and doing the work that you've done. Thank you to everybody who came along this evening. There's some amazing things in the chat. Please do, if you want to continue this conversation on Twitter, Twitter for Flint Books is @Flint_books. We'll just pop that in the chat now. And then, you're welcome to kind of pop on there. I know that some of the contributors will be on there. So if you tag them at various points, I'm sure they'll pick it up as the week goes on. We've got various sessions throughout the week. And again, all of those are up on our Twitter feed. So do come and join us. They're all free. This is very much because we want this conversation to continue and to live outside the book. And please do get a chance to explore the book as well in your own time. Thank you, everybody. Have a lovely evening and a day, I think, where you are, or night now. Take care, everybody. Thank you.